James Dean's former home in Sherman Oaks, Los Angeles, holds a mystique that even decades of ownership changes and renovations have failed to dispel. Nestled among the leafy streets, the modest mid-century home remains a magnet for fans of the iconic actor. But over the years, some visitors and residents have reported strange phenomena that seem to suggest Dean's restless spirit might still linger there. It was a balmy evening in late September when local contractor Nathan Coleman visited the property. Hired to assess some structural issues for the current owner, Coleman arrived just before dusk. As he walked up the driveway, his attention was drawn to the garage, a compact structure that once housed Dean's beloved vehicles. Coleman noticed something unusual. Against the garage door, illuminated by the dim glow of a nearby streetlight, a shadow flickered. It was the distinct silhouette of a motorcyclist, complete with a helmet and the unmistakable curve of handlebars. The shadow moved, as if the rider were revving the engine, yet the driveway was empty, and no vehicle could be seen. Curious but unsettled, Coleman approached the garage. As he drew closer, the faint but distinct sound of an engine roaring to life filled the air. It wasn't the hum of a modern motorcycle, but the deep, resonant growl of a vintage engine. The sound echoed briefly before cutting off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The current owner, a private individual who wished to remain anonymous, later revealed that this wasn't the first report of strange happenings. They mentioned several incidents where late-night visitors had heard the unmistakable sound of engines, even though the garage had been empty for years. Some claimed to see fleeting shadows in the backyard, resembling a figure dressed in leather, pacing near the old garden gate. A historian and avid James Dean fan, Marcus Heller, offered a theory. Dean was known for his passion for motorcycles and cars, particularly his legendary Porsche 550 Spider. The garage in Sherman Oaks was reportedly one of the places where he worked on his vehicles, tinkering for hours, lost in his mechanical world. If there's any place he'd want to revisit, Heller said, it would be that garage. It was his sanctuary. Another chilling account came from a previous tenant, Olivia Ramirez, who lived in the house during the late 1980s. Ramirez recalled how the garage light would often flicker at odd intervals. I thought it was just old wiring, she said. But one night, I woke up to see the light fully on. I went outside to turn it off, and that's when I saw it. A shadow of someone crouched by the garage door, like they were working on something. When I called out, it disappeared instantly. Ramirez moved out shortly after, citing an uneasy feeling that she could never quite shake. Skeptics chalk up these occurrences to overactive imaginations fueled by Dean's legendary status and tragic death at just 24 years old. However, for those who have lived near or visited the house, the stories are difficult to dismiss. The persistent reports of engine sounds, shadows, and the occasional faint whiff of motor oil suggest that James Dean's spirit might still find solace in the spaces he once cherished. To this day, passersby sometimes pause by the garage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the phantom motorcyclist or hear the ghostly growl of an engine. Whether it's myth or reality, one thing is certain. James Dean's aura continues to haunt not just Hollywood, but also the quiet corners of Sherman Oaks where he once dreamed and tinkered, forever a rebel in the twilight. 2 weeks after Nathan Coleman's unsettling experience, the property owner decided to investigate the strange occurrences themselves. Equipped with a flashlight and a skeptical mind, they ventured into the garage one night, hoping to prove there was a logical explanation for the sounds and shadows. The garage had long been stripped of its original purpose. The space, now a makeshift storage unit, housed old furniture, boxes of forgotten knickknacks, and gardening tools. Yet, as the flashlight beam cut through the darkness, the owner noticed something they hadn't seen before: a faint set of tire marks on the dusty concrete floor. The tracks seemed fresh, as though a vehicle had been rolled in and out recently. But how could that be? No car or motorcycle had been parked there in years. Suddenly, the garage door rattled violently, as if someone or something was on the other side, trying to force their way in. The owner froze, heart pounding, as the sound of an engine rumbled to life just outside. They turned off the flashlight and crept toward the side window, peeking out through the slatted blinds. There it was, a motorcycle, gleaming under the faint moonlight, its chrome glinting as though it had just been polished. Perched on it was the silhouette of a rider, the helmet obscuring any details of the figure's face. The engine roared louder, shaking the window pane, and then the rider turned their heads slightly, as if aware of being watched. And just as quickly as it had appeared, the motorcycle and its rider vanished, leaving behind only the echo of the engine and the faint smell of burning rubber. The next day, shaken but determined, the owner decided to clear out the garage in search of answers. As they sifted through the clutter, they unearthed a dusty wooden box tucked into the farthest corner. It was locked, the metal clasp rusted with age. Intrigued, they pried it open using a crowbar. Inside was a collection of photographs, all of them featuring James Dean in various candid moments smiling beside his Porsche, leaning against his Triumph motorcycle, and sitting on the hood of an old truck. But among these familiar images was something that made the owner's stomach twist with unease. A handwritten note, scrawled in an unsteady hand. It read, "Keep her running. She'll take you places even I couldn't reach." The owner turned the note over, only to find a sketch on the back. A crude but unmistakable drawing of a winding road leading into a dense fog. At the end of the road was a figure on a motorcycle, waiting. That afternoon, the owner decided to confide in their next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Walter, who had lived on the street since the 1950s. Walter listened quietly as the owner recounted the events of the previous night and the discovery of the box. When they finished, Walter leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "You're not the first to see him," he said. "Back in '56, just a year after Dean's accident, the folks who lived there swore they heard him working on a bike late at night. They'd see shadows moving in the garage, tools clanging, but when they went to check, there was nothing there." Walter paused, his gaze drifting toward the house. "But it's not just the garage," he continued. "People say if you stand in the backyard at midnight, you can hear a voice whispering. Some think it's him. Others say it's something trying to call him back." Before the owner could ask more, Walter leaned forward and added, "If I were you, I wouldn't go looking too deep. Some things are better left where they are." That night, unable to resist the pull of curiosity, the owner found themselves standing in the backyard as the clock struck midnight. The air was unnaturally still, and the faint scent of motor oil hung in the breeze. They closed their eyes, straining to hear any sign of the whispers Walter had mentioned. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, as though carried from a great distance, a voice broke through the stillness. Low, raspy, and tinged with sadness, it murmured, "Keep her running." The owner's eyes snapped open, and their breath caught in their throat. The garage light flickered, and the sound of a wrench clattering to the floor echoed from inside. They stepped forward, drawn by an invisible force, their heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. And then, the garage door creaked open on its own. Slowly, as if inviting them in, the door rolled upward, revealing the dimly lit interior. The light bulb hanging from the ceiling swayed slightly, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. The owner hesitated at the threshold, their flashlight gripped tightly in one hand. The faint smell of motor oil was stronger now, mixed with the unmistakable tang of gasoline. A metallic clink echoed from within, like the sound of a tool being placed on a workbench. But the space appeared empty, at least to the naked eye. Steeling their nerves, the owner stepped inside. The air felt heavier, pressing against their chest, and their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the concrete floor. Then they noticed something impossible. The fresh outline of a motorcycle tire imprinted in the dust, leading toward the workbench at the back of the garage. As they followed the track, the air grew colder, and a faint hum began to resonate. The closer they got to the workbench, the more the hum transformed into something recognizable. The deep growl of an engine revving, though faint and distant, as if coming from another plane of existence. The owner reached the workbench, and there it was, an old wrench lying on its surface, polished and gleaming as though it had just been used. Next to it, a small notebook sat open, its yellowed pages fluttering slightly despite the still air. The owner's hand trembled as they reached for the notebook. The entries were scrawled in hurried handwriting, notes that seemed to detail adjustments to an engine. But scattered among the technical jargon were phrases that sent a chill down their spine. The road calls, but it's not the one I knew. She's waiting in the fog. I can hear her whispers. Keep moving or you'll never leave. The final entry was dated September 30th, 1955, the day James Dean died. Beneath the date, a single sentence was written in bold, jagged letters. I'm still on the curve. The owner barely had time to process the words when the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath became visible, clouds of white in the dim light. The hum of the engine grew louder, accompanied by a faint vibration in the floor. It felt as though something massive was approaching, its presence filling the room. The shadows on the wall began to shift, forming the unmistakable silhouette of a motorcycle and rider. The figure seemed to emerge from the wall itself, solidifying for just a moment before dissolving back into the darkness. Then, from the corner of their vision, the owner saw movement, a flicker of light at the garage door. Turning, they froze. The doorway now opened into a swirling fog, dense and glowing faintly as if lit from within. Shapes moved within the mist, indistinct and fleeting, but the faint outline of a road was visible, winding away into an unknowable distance. The notebook on the workbench snapped shut with a force that echoed like a gunshot, and the fog pulsed, as though alive. From within, the sound of the motorcycle roared again, this time deafening, as if whatever was waiting beyond the mist had awakened. And then, just as the owner took a step toward the fog, compelled by something they couldn't explain, a voice rang out clear and commanding, yet tinged with despair. Don't follow me. The fog began to recede, pulling back toward the horizon of the impossible road. But just before it disappeared completely, a figure emerged, a lone rider, helmet tilted slightly upward as though looking directly at the owner. They blinked and the figure was gone. The fog dissipated entirely, leaving only the quiet hum of the garage light and the faint smell of gasoline. But the notebook was no longer on the workbench. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The disappearance of the notebook left the owner stunned. They searched the garage frantically, pulling open drawers, checking under the workbench, even peering into dusty corners where no one had tread in years. But it was gone, vanished as though it had never existed. Only the faint impression of its outline remained in the dust on the workbench, mocking them. As they stood there, heart pounding, the faint rumble of an engine began again. This time it was distant, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably real. The sound wasn't coming from the garage, it was outside, near the street. Grabbing a jacket, the owner hurried to the driveway, scanning the quiet neighborhood. Under the pale glow of the streetlights, the road stretched on, empty and silent. Yet the engine noise persisted, an eerie echo that seemed to circle them, impossible to pinpoint. Just as they turned to head back inside, something caught their eye. A set of fresh tire tracks winding away from the garage, the tread marks glistening faintly as if soaked in dew. The tracks led down the street and disappeared into the darkness. Unable to shake the unease, the owner decided to call it a night. Back inside the house, they locked every door and window, checked every light switch, and even left the television on for comfort. But as they passed through the living room, something made them stop in their tracks. On the coffee table sat the notebook. It lay open to a new page, one that hadn't been there before. The handwriting was bold and deliberate, every stroke pressed hard into the paper. It read, "Midnight at the Bend. Don't look back." The words sent a shiver down the owner's spine. They glanced at the clock. It was 11:45 p.m. The bend could only mean one thing: a sharp curve in the road less than a mile from the house. It was infamous among locals, both for its treacherous angle and for being the place where Dean's Porsche 550 Spider would have passed on its way north the day of his accident. Compelled by equal parts fear and curiosity, the owner grabbed their keys and headed out, the notebook tucked under one arm. The drive to the bend was uneventful, but the tension in the air was palpable. The streetlights seemed dimmer, the shadows longer. As the owner approached the curve, the hum of an engine returned, growing louder with each passing second. They parked just before the bend and stepped out into the cool night. The road was empty, stretching ahead in a quiet stillness that felt unnatural. Clutching the notebook tightly, they walked toward the curve, every step echoing in the silence. And then they saw it. A faint light appeared just beyond the bend, flickering like the beam of an old headlight. It grew brighter, accompanied by the unmistakable growl of a vintage engine. The sound seemed to wrap around them, vibrating in their chest. The light rounded the curve slowly, revealing the shadowy outline of a car, a sleek, low-profile vehicle that gleamed faintly under the moonlight. It was the Porsche 550 Spider, unmistakable in its iconic design. But it wasn't just the car that froze the owner in place, it was the figure behind the wheel. Dressed in a leather jacket and white t-shirt, the driver's face was partially obscured by the shadows. But the eyes, sharp and piercing, locked onto the owner with an intensity that seemed to pierce through time itself. The car idled, the engine rumbling like a heartbeat, as the driver slowly raised a hand. For a moment it looked like a wave, or was it a warning? The owner stepped forward, unable to resist the pull, when suddenly the figure leaned out of the window and whispered, their voice carried on an unnatural wind. "Do you know what's waiting at the end of the road?" Before the owner could answer, the engine roared, the headlights flared blindingly bright, and the car sped off into the night, vanishing just as it rounded the bend. But when the owner turned to leave, they noticed something chilling. The tire tracks that had been there moments ago now led not toward the road, but back toward their house. Heart pounding, the owner rushed back to their car, desperate to get home. As they turned the ignition, the faint smell of gasoline filled the air, and the rumble of a distant engine echoed again, this time closer than before. Checking the rearview mirror, they caught a glimpse of something impossible, a faint glow of headlights speeding toward them from the same direction the Porsche had vanished. The owner floored the gas pedal, the car lurching forward as the rumbling grew louder, almost deafening. They didn't dare look back, focusing solely on the road ahead. But as they neared their house, the glow of headlights loomed in the rearview mirror again, closer now, impossibly fast. Skidding into the driveway, the owner bolted from the car and ran to the front door. Fumbling with the keys, they managed to unlock it and slam it shut just as the roar of the mysterious engine stopped outside. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the owner's ragged breathing. When they finally gathered the courage to look through the window, the driveway was empty. No car, no headlights, just the faint tire marks leading directly to their garage. Against every instinct screaming at them to stay inside, the owner felt an inexplicable pull toward the garage. They grabbed a flashlight and pushed open the door leading to the dim, cavernous space. The garage light flickered, casting strange, wavering shadows, and the faint hum of an engine filled the air once more. At the center of the garage sat something that hadn't been there before, a motorcycle. It was a classic Triumph, polished to perfection, its chrome gleaming under the flickering light. A wrench lay on the seat, alongside the notebook now closed. The owner approached cautiously, their footsteps echoing. The bike looked pristine, as though it had just been restored, yet it exuded a strange energy that made the air feel electric. They reached out to touch it, their fingers brushing the cool metal, when the engine suddenly roared to life. The motorcycle's headlight flared, illuminating the garage in a harsh white light. Shadows danced wildly on the walls, taking on shapes that resembled figures: mechanics, drivers, spectators, before melding into a single silhouette. A rider, helmet in hand, standing at the edge of the light. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, the owner saw his face clearly. It was James Dean Young, defiant and somehow otherworldly. His piercing gaze met theirs, and he spoke in a voice that echoed like a memory. "This road isn't yours. Turn back before you reach the end." Before the owner could respond, the motorcycle revved loudly, and the light engulfed the entire garage. When it faded, the space was empty. No motorcycle, no notebook, no trace of the haunting events except for the lingering smell of gasoline and the faint sound of an engine fading into the distance. The owner spent the following days trying to piece together what had happened. They searched for the notebook, the photographs, any physical evidence, but it was as if none of it had ever existed. The tire tracks in the driveway vanished after a rainstorm, and the scent of motor oil gradually faded from the air. Yet, late at night, the faint hum of an engine sometimes drifted through the house, accompanied by fleeting shadows and the distant sound of tires on asphalt. The owner avoided the garage, locking it up and vowing never to step foot inside again. But they knew deep down that the story wasn't over. Somewhere, on a road that didn't exist on any map, the figure of James Dean still rode, trapped between worlds, searching for the end of the road he could never reach. And now, the owner couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow tied to his journey, forever haunted by the question he'd asked that night. Do you know what's waiting at the end of the road? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.